Reddit. What does your kid do that creeps you out? When I was 16, I was babysitting for a 9-month-old baby. After putting her down, in her crib sound asleep, I quietly walk downstairs and sit on the couch to watch a little TV. I start to hear the baby fussing and crying on the baby monitor, so I head back upstairs, only to find the baby sleeping soundly in her crib. I was a little confused and thought this was kinda weird, but I wasn't totally creeped out yet. When I got downstairs and heard the baby on the baby monitor crying again, I got the craziest chill down my spine. Head back upstairs. The baby in front of me still sounds asleep. Back downstairs. I am sitting and looking at the possessed baby monitor, when all of a sudden a very low, gurgly voice comes on over the monitor saying, "Hush, baby." I turned it off right away and sat in silence until the parents came home. Come to find out, the neighbors had the same baby monitor system, and apparently this was not the first time they had picked up the sound from the neighbor's house. A warning would have been nice. My daughter, when she was 3, used to talk about her imaginary friend all the time. Said he was big and fun and spent a lot of time playing with her. One day I was scanning old photos and had a picture of my father on my desk, and she said, "Hey, how did you get a photo of my friend?" I instantly got shivers down my spine. My father died in the house almost 15 years ago, and she played in a room that used to be his office. I cautiously asked her to tell me more about her friend, and without hesitating, she told me he talked funny. The chills stopped me dead in my tracks because Dad was an Aussie who never lost his accent. This one is a little extra creepy because both of my kids have done similar things. My 4-year-old son used to talk in some amount of detail about ghosts. We'd be finishing up bath time, and he'd tell me that ghosts were in his room watching us. Trying my best to remain calm, I asked him a few questions, all of which he seemed to have answers to. Where are they? Up there near the bathroom vent. Is it a boy or a girl? It's a girl. What is she doing? She's bothering me. Add to that this little experience. My wife enjoys grave hunting for famous people, and we're pretty close to the Oakland Cemetery. Well, one afternoon, my wife thought she'd take the kids there and make a bit of a park trip of it. However, as they're driving in and through the hills, my son remarks on how there are a bunch of people in the distance, and they're all waving at him. Of course, there's no funeral party or anything, just an average empty day in the cemetery. So, my wife scrapped the idea and went home. Whenever we've mentioned going back there, he talks about all those guys who were waving. My daughter, just past 2, has this thing at night where she's scared of a lady. She will sit in her crib, near tears, chanting over and over, "Lady coming. Lady, lady coming." When we ask her about it, she points against an opposite wall, or in some other area, a very specific spot, and says she's there talking to her. We told her to tell the lady to go away and leave you alone. And she then says, "Bother brother," as in, but she'll go and bother brother, and she'll get just as upset over this thought. This is not mine, but one of my colleagues. His young daughter regularly tells him and his wife that they are not her real parents, though they are. She has names for her real parents. The dad is Richard, and the mom is Bitchad. Bitchad died when the daughter was a baby, but she keeps it up further than that. Whenever they give her something new to try, like a pomegranate, she will offhandedly remark, "Richard and I had a pomegranate at the beach just last week." She has a whole backstory for them. They lived in a 3-room house with moderate furnishings and not a lot of money. She can describe the car they had, the things they would do, everything. Richard is not an invisible friend either. She has 9 of those, all with weird names like Fleep. My colleague is not concerned about her. Nor does he think she's doing it seriously and believes it. Maybe she just thinks it's a funny game to play, to see her parents get butt out by those kinds of comments. When our son was 3, my husband decided to treat him to a flight over our city in a Cessna. When it was time to get on the plane, our boy climbed into the pilot's seat and was extremely upset when he was told he had to move. He began crying and saying he was sorry. He didn't mean to crash that plane last time, and he said he'd be good this time. My husband managed to calm him by pointing out that his legs were too short for his feet to reach the pedals. Once he got settled in the back seat, he started fussing about not being able to use the radio, so the pilot got him a headset, just didn't plug it in all the way. Our son then started trying to raise the tower so he could do his radio check and get clearance. At that point, the pilot needed to take a break. He went for a smoke while my husband talked to our son, who told him that he crashed the last plane he flew and a lot of people died. When the pilot got back, they were able to do the flight with no further issues. About a year later, we went to an aeronautics museum where an old Mosquito was being restored. Our son told the curator that he used to fly one of those, so he offered us a tour of the plane. When we got in, our son pointed out several things that were wrong with the plane, which turned out to be correct, things like the joystick being the wrong sort. The curator told us the plane had previously been modernized and was now being restored to its original condition. He also confirmed that the items our son had pointed out were in fact slated to be replaced. Our kid is grown now and doesn't remember ever being a pilot before, and has absolutely zero interest in planes, but he does remember just knowing things about airplanes and piloting them. My younger sister, when she was 3, started talking to my mom about when I was a big girl and you were a little girl. She said she went to my parents' wedding. She described her old self physically, and my mom says that sounded like my mom's grandmother Grace. My sister also talked about the greenhouse she used to live in, at the end of a dirt road, and the fact that her mother died from a snake bite while they lived there. She said she killed the snake with a rake. These discussions always took place at bedtime. One day, we were putting in the garden, and my dad was sitting down and sharpening the rake when my sister told him he was doing it wrong. He told her to show him how to do it. She put her hands on his and placed them in the correct position, and later he said that she was right, but he was doing it wrong. She probably told these things on and off for about 6 months, and by 4 she would say, "I'm tired of talking about it." I don't have kids, but I do have 3-year-old twin cousins. Once we were playing in their backyard and I picked up a tool rake. To impress them with an awesome feat of strength, I threw it across the yard. Overshot, it hit the cement and broke. At first, they thought it was funny. Then they got upset and asked why I broke it. I explained that it was an accident and that I'd buy them a new one. They go back to being happy, but suddenly one picked up the broken pieces and took them to the picnic table. He had a hand on each piece and started swirling them in circles, and then started chanting. Yes, chanting, in a monotone expressionless voice with a vacant stare. "We know you broke it, Daddy. We know you broke it, Daddy. We know you broke it, Daddy." First of all, I broke it, not their dad. Then his brother walks up, takes a broken piece, and starts moving it in sync with his brother, and starts up the same chant. In the same creepy monotone way, including the stare. "We know you broke it, Daddy. We know you broke it, Daddy." This honestly went on for a solid 3 minutes. I kept calling their names and trying to get them to play. Finally, they snapped out of it and ran off to play. It was so creepy. I later went in and told my aunt what happened. She told me that they often go into creepy little modes pretty often, and have scared her before. Man, I love those kids, so strange. My childhood friend has 9-year-old twin boys. They started breeding mice and were really getting into it. Seemed they loved these mice. Their mum of course wasn't so keen on the idea, but it was really keeping them amused 4 hours at a time. Before and after school, they'd rush to the mice and spend till dinner time with them. Had to be told to come upstairs to bed and leave the mice alone. Seemed they were really attached to these mice, and for once they were playing nicely together. It all made for a nice change. Anyway, one day after a good couple of months of the boys' mice infatuation, their mum went upstairs to do something. She goes into their room and noticed one of them quickly shoving something under the pillow when she entered. Thinking they're up to no good, she asks, "What's that you put under there? What are you hiding? What is it? Let me see it." Together they're given the standard answer, "It's nothing, Mum. It's nothing." She kept on insisting that they show her. They really didn't want to. So she walks over and flings the pillow out of the way. And there were the boys' He-Man dolls, all decked out in little coats. Coats that she recognized as mice pelts. Every year my father threw me a surprise party for my birthday. He would take me to my aunt's house to sleep over while they prepared the house. Although I was a good kid, that day I was being kind of a brat. So when my brother and sister asked if they could come for the ride, I threw a fit until my father told them no. I never had a problem with them coming before. I looked over at my father as he was starting the car and told him to put on his seatbelt. This was the late 80s, and wearing a seatbelt just wasn't a standard thing to do. We never ever wore seatbelts. He asked me why. I told him that I didn't know, but I wanted him to put it on. He could tell that if he didn't do what I said, another tantrum would ensue all the way to my aunt's house, so he did. About 10 minutes later, we were getting onto the on-ramp of the expressway and were well on our way. I was getting a little sleepy, so I closed my eyes, but not all the way. Out of nowhere, I saw streaking lights zooming by. My exact thought was, "What a cool dream." Then, I realized that it wasn't a dream, and that I heard glass break. I turned to my left, and my dad was passed out on the steering wheel. I began to cry uncontrollably. We had just been in a really terrible car accident. Someone hit us from behind. The entire back of the car had been smashed into the front. The ambulance came and rushed us to the hospital. I couldn't stop crying and calling for my dad. At some point, when he heard me crying, he promised to get me the doll baby wanna talk for my birthday if I stopped crying, so I did. Luckily, we were both okay. We had some injuries, but nothing life-threatening. The doctors told us that, if we both hadn't been wearing seatbelts, we would have been killed immediately, as would anyone who was sitting in the back seat. My brother and sister would have sat there, if I wasn't so against them coming. I don't remember how long it was after the accident, but one day, my father randomly asked me how I knew to put on our seatbelts even though we had never worn them before. I simply answered that I didn't know. I still don't. My daughter was sick, and I chalked it up to fever delirium. When she was 5, I woke up in the middle of the night, because I heard her just laughing up a storm, having this full-blown hilarious conversation with someone. My thoughts were that she either got a hold of my phone and called a grandparent, or was talking to her little brother. I go into her room. She's sitting with her legs crossed on her bed, looking in front of her, just talking to nothing. I go and sit on the edge of the bed. She introduces me to her friend. I have never been more creeped out because of the way she behaved. I felt that person in the room too. It was weird. We agreed that she needed to go back to bed so she could feel better. I got her some Gatorade and Tylenol. She went back to sleep. I never heard from the person again. Was just so weird and spooky. When she was a bit younger, she used to talk about the old man that would come visit her. I would watch her just laugh and laugh while standing up at the edge of her crib. A part of me feels like she's just really good at creeping me out. Kids, man, they really can make you question if you're sane. I wonder why it creeps me out, but here it is. My daughter will be 6 next week. Since about the age of 3.5, I noticed that she remembers everything. Not useless trivia, or random number or Lorraine man, or anything like that, but everything else that is important in that little world of hers. There are some examples. Once she couldn't find a stuffed toy of hers. I say, I think you took it to your mom's house. We'll have to pick it up tomorrow. She replied instantly, no, I'm sure it's at Grandma's house. As chance had it, we were headed to Grandma's that day, and not only did she know it was there, she knew exactly where she had left it. We hadn't been to Grandma's for nearly 2 weeks prior to this. Another day, I lost my orange hair tie and kept looking around the house. She told me immediately she remembered that it was on the desk in my office, where I had put it the previous week. Somehow, she could read Longish books word for word by remembering and repeating what I had read to her in the past. By Longish, I mean children's picture books over 50 sentences long. Here's where it gets a little creepier. When she was first born, my wife and I would refer to her by a certain nickname. After the divorce, I stopped using it. Last month, I called her by the nickname for the first time in something like over 3 years. She looks at me and says, "My mommy and you used to call me that when I was a baby." My now ex and I separated when she was less than 2 years old. Maybe her mom told her about the nickname, but doubtful. Not a mum, but I was a nanny for many years. One of my little ones, 2-year-old and an incredibly smart child, is way ahead developmentally in almost every way. He used to like to tell me things while we got him ready for bed. It was almost always these weird stories, which would always start with, "When I was an old lady," and they were always very specific little day in the life of type things that I quickly realized went beyond the life experience and typical vocabulary of a 2-year-old. Over a few months, he kept adding very consistently to this story. He would also sometimes play as this old lady, with a cloth over his head, and walking slowly as if his back pained him. Grocery shopping or playing with his sister's dolls, as if they were his grandchildren, was his favorite when he did this. He added some specific details like how many children she had, and how many grandchildren, how her husband had died in his 50s from a lung disease, while one of her daughters had died in their 30s in a car accident, leaving 2 children who she took in with the help of another daughter. He also said she had a bad back and pain in her feet. One of her daughters would rub her feet to help with the pain. All but one of her children was married. The unmarried daughter lived with her, and she worried she would never marry. She remembered dying. She had been crossing a street and hit by a car. She described how people stood around her, where it hurt, and how someone eventually lifted her into a car and took her to the hospital where she died. I was not his only nanny, and he was consistent with these stories. Us nannies would get together and swap stories, and I would write them down, because I had been fascinated with phenomena like past life before this and wanted to see where it all went. He also described the house and neighborhood they lived in. This is especially interesting as this kid came from a super wealthy family and had never even seen the kind of housing or poverty he was describing. He also talked about living by the seaside. Months into this unfolding, we visited a seaside city on the other side of the country. One day, a family member there was having a birthday party, so we piled in the van to drive over, and our driver got lost. We ended up driving through this extremely poor neighborhood, and suddenly my little boy started shouting and screaming, and insisted we turn down a couple of specific streets. He started pointing out the window and telling us things he was recognizing from when I was an old lady. It matched what he'd previously described in general, and we were all so interested we let him direct us where to go, as we were already going to be late for the party anyway. He accurately described what we would see around the next turn several times, but got extremely confused and upset when he got to where her house was, because it was now a store. The driver leaned out the window and asked a nearby old person what had been there before the store, and was told houses. We never went back there or were able to get any additional verification. Totally understandably, his parents were concerned about this storytelling and how vivid and strange it was. So after this dramatic incident, we made an active effort to redirect him to other stories and play types. As he approached 3, he started telling less and less of these stories, and they got less and less specific. By about 3.5, he couldn't even remember telling us stories about being an old lady. He thought we were joking with him. To this day, over 25 years later, I can't explain it really.